Welcome back to the channel. Let's get started.
Let me ask you, what's the difference between a piece of paper full of promises and a cow standing out in the pasture? The paper doesn't feel hunger, doesn't feel cold, it just lies quietly in a drawer in Edinburgh, in London, properly signed and stamped. But the cow, the thing this piece of paper calls an asset, has to stand in the snowstorm and fend for itself. This is a story of real money, poured in from across the ocean into the pastures of the West like floodwater, only to be wiped clean off the map by a single winter in just a few weeks. In the early 1880s, the Western Range was still wide open, unfenced, with grass growing for free and no one charging land rent. Raising one calf costs less than $2, yet at times you can sell it for as much as $60 a head. A leading figure in the industry at the time calculated that raising a free-range cow cost about $1.50, while it usually sold for $23, peaking at over $60. Profits over 10 times the initial capital, such a story would move anyone anywhere, let alone in the aristocratic drawing rooms of England. News of that profit flew across the Atlantic faster than any ship. Whenever a British investor reported profits back home, sometimes 33% a year, sometimes 80 to 100% in just a single year, the wave of money pouring into America's grasslands rose another notch. From 1882 to 1886, British investments in American livestock companies reached $45 million. In Wyoming alone, as many as 181 livestock companies have registered, with total capital of over $94 million. People say that most of the biggest companies in this region are actually British, with the Scots backing them behind the scenes. In the spring of 1883, a man named Alexander Swan boarded a ship all the way to Edinburgh, Scotland, to find investors. Swan Land and Cattle Company was registered on March 30, 1883, raising between $2.6 and $2.9 million. With that amount of money, the company controls nearly 100,000 head of cattle, spread across 4.5 million acres, nearly 6% of the entire state's land area. In the first 2 years, shareholders in Edinburgh received a 9% dividend, then 10%, everyone believed they had struck a goldmine that required no digging. Around the same time, another company was established in 1880 by an Edinburgh bank. They bought an entire large farm outright for $253,000, including 14,000 cattle and 250 saddle horses. By the end of 1882, this company controlled nearly 100,000 head of cattle, spread across an unbroken stretch of land 300 miles long. Then there was a man named Moreton Fruin, the third son of an aristocratic family from Sussex, England, who originally came to America just to hunt. He set up a livestock company with an all-British board of directors meeting in London, raised $1.5 million, and turned loose more than 50,000 cattle on the vast grasslands. Later generations gave him the nickname, Bearer of Deadly Misfortune, for his talent of squandering fortunes and his reckless ventures that never paid off the way he had promised. And here's where we want you to stop and think, that board of directors sitting in London, they signed off on a decision about a herd of cattle that most of them had never once set foot to see with their own eyes. Day after day, the cowboy worked for a boss he had never met, an ocean away, every decision having to travel through letters that took weeks to arrive. And there was one more man, who didn't hold nearly as large a herd of cattle, but sold that dream more skillfully than anyone else, a German-born baron who settled in Denver, dealt in real estate, and built an entire castle just for himself. In 1885, he published a book, asserting, raising cattle on American grasslands yields a minimum profit of 25% a year, which compounded over 5 years could reach 156%. The book sold like a Bible for anyone who wants to get rich quick. Hearing this, does it sound familiar to you? A book promising dream numbers, written by someone who never once herded cattle through a snowstorm with their own hands. Numbers on paper always look prettier than the thing they represent, because a number doesn't need to eat, doesn't need shelter when it turns cold. And that winter is drawing near, and the meadows were exhausted before the blizzard even rose. In the early 1880s, after the tribes had been pushed into Indian territory, new land opened up for grazing, and everyone poured their cattle into it. In 1885, a presidential order forced the removal of cattle from leased land in the Indian Territory. More than 200,000 head are being pushed back into the already overcrowded Texas Panhandle region. Where a cow used to have 40 acres of pasture to graze on, now there are only 10 acres left. Since 1882, cattlemen's associations have had barbed wire fences put up to keep cattle from wandering far. By 1885, that fence ran all the way from the New Mexico border to the Indian Territory. The intention was good, keep the cows from wandering off. But that very fence would later become a deadly trap when the storm came. The summer of 1886 brought a fierce drought, burning the grass dry. That November, wildfires spread from the Arkansas River all the way to northeastern New Mexico, burning away what little grass remained. The herd of cattle entered winter already hungry, already thin, before the first snowflake fell. The signs of trouble were already appearing in the books, before the worst of the blizzard struck. The 1885 dividend dropped to 6%, because cattle prices fell from $40.67 to $33.80 a head. Back at Moreton Fruin's company, in the spring of 1886, even before that fateful winter, the shareholders had grown weary, and they gathered to depose him from the manager's seat. Money had already started to smell trouble, before any cow had to die from the cold. In late November 1886, an early blizzard swept across the northern plains. In late December, the temperature in Glendive, Montana dropped to -35 degrees Fahrenheit. Then on January 9, 1887, the biggest storm of them all struck. Snow piled up over 16 inches deep, and temperatures in some places plunged to nearly -50 degrees Fahrenheit. In early February of that year, another town recorded -43 degrees Fahrenheit. The wind kept blowing, and the cattle kept drifting with it in search of shelter, then bunching together in front of the barbed wire fences that had gone up just 2 years before. There's no way forward, nowhere to hide. Across the ocean, in the warm drawing rooms of Edinburgh, shareholders were still waiting for news of incoming dividends, and no one yet knew what was happening out on the meadows. In Helena, Montana, there was a boss named Lewis Kaufman who lived in a newly built mansion. Hearing the news of the storm, his heart burned with anxiety. He wrote a letter asking his farm manager, "How are the cattle doing now?" The manager didn't know how to answer. The letter lay there on the table, while the storm outside still raged on. At that time, there was a young cowboy named Charlie Russell working nearby, holding a small piece of cardboard about the size of a hand. He hastily drew a skinny, bony cow, head bowed in the snow, with 2 gray wolves lurking nearby. Then write the words, "Waiting for the warm wind," below. That tiny painting was the answer sent back to Helena, not a single number, not a single line of financial report. When money asks, "How is my herd of cattle doing?" the most honest answer isn't a number, but the image of a creature waiting to die. By early March, warm winds blew, the snow melted, and the truth was fully revealed. Cow carcasses lay scattered all the way to the horizon. A rancher recalled, "You could walk for miles on end across cattle carcasses without ever setting foot on the ground." The cattle carcasses drifted along, piling up in the riverbed, making the water undrinkable. In Montana alone, it is estimated that around 600,000 dead cattle carcasses were found that spring. In the hardest-hit pastures, the death rate reached up to 90% of the total herd. Theodore Roosevelt, who also owned 2 private ranches nearby, had to exclaim, "We have just experienced a complete collapse. The damage is fatal." He lowered the letter and looked out over his own empty pasture. And then, just like cattle out in the fields, the money in London and Edinburgh collapsed right along with it. In 1886, the Swan Land and Cattle Company had no dividends left, as cattle prices had dropped to just $26.34 a head. The company's ranch manager estimated that their herd alone lost more than 25%. By May 1887, the board of directors had already fired Alexander Swan from his position as manager. At that other company, the manager had to lower the price of beef and sell off the land in small parcels just to survive the crisis. As for Moreton Fruin's company, the one that had already pushed him out before the storm hit. It finally dissolved in 1889, unable to recover. As for the Baron, the one who wrote the book promising a minimum return of 25% a year, even his own farm collapsed in this wave, just like all the other farms for which he had once painted a rosy future. His book is still selling well. While his own cow starved in the field, not caring whether its owner wrote books or not. That is the lesson that anyone who has ever stood watch over a herd through a long winter understands, whether they've read books or not. Paper promises from a distant city can never save a living creature that is starving to death right in front of you. A contract signed in Edinburgh won't keep a cow warm in Wyoming. A 10% dividend doesn't just sprout grass on its own in the freezing January. Whenever a wave of money rushes after quick profit and forgets to ask whether the real thing standing behind that number is actually doing well, the outcome, sooner or later, ends up just like that winter pasture story. After that great extinction, the open grasslands no longer existed. People started fencing off smaller plots of land and raising fewer cows. They make hay for the winter, instead of leaving it to chance. From then on, livestock farming was less of a gamble and more of a real business. You have to calculate, to keep reserves, to stay close to what you own instead of sitting far away collecting dividends. We have nothing left to teach you but that. Money, no matter where it comes from, no matter how sweet its promises, can never replace the person standing out in the field, watching over the animals through a stormy night. Whoever forgets that, sooner or later a winter will come to remind them. Outside the window, the snow had stopped falling. The sky was beginning to brighten. In the distance, a low wooden fence, and a few cows quietly grazing on the fresh grass.
Thanks for watching. I really appreciate you stopping by. I hope you enjoy the view as much as I do. Don't forget to hit bell. Take care and see you soon.